Nothing breeds insomnia like a wife on a late project for the fourth night running. That, or gas station coffee at midnight while staring at spreadsheets that could put a narcoleptic to sleep. I'm Porter Kellor, 36 years old, and I make my living untangling supply chains for companies that can't figure out why their widgets aren't getting from point A to point B without detours through the Bermuda Triangle. It's honest work, boring as watching paint dry, but it pays the bills and keeps my brain sharp enough to notice when things don't add up. Like tonight, for instance. Our Victorian house in Medford creaks like an old ship, especially when you're prowling around at 1 a.m. with nothing but the refrigerator's hum for company. The kitchen still smells like the Thai takeout I ate alone 6 hours ago, while Nola was supposedly presenting quarterly recruitment metrics to some client whose name changes every time I ask about it. The buzzing sound came from the counter near the coffee maker that hasn't seen action since Nola decided she was too sophisticated for home-brewed caffeine. Her second phone, the one she thought I didn't know about, lit up with a message notification. "You up?" E. I stared at the screen for a full 30 seconds, my brain doing that thing it does when I'm auditing a particularly screwed-up inventory system. Pattern recognition, data analysis, the slow, methodical assembly of facts that most people would rather ignore. Ethan. Had to be Ethan Blume from her office. Project manager, 31, drives a BMW that costs more than most people's annual salary and has the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no by anyone who mattered. The front door opened with its familiar squeal, another item on my growing list of home repairs that Nola kept postponing because they weren't aesthetic priorities. Her heels clicked against the hardwood in that particular rhythm that meant she was either drunk or nervous. Maybe both. "Porter, you awake?" Her voice carried that artificial sweetness she used when she was about to lie to me. "Kitchen," I called back, sliding her phone back to its original position with the practiced ease of someone who'd been checking it regularly for 3 weeks. She appeared in the doorway, and even in the dim light from the refrigerator, I could see she was rattled. Her blazer was wrinkled, her lipstick gone, and her skirt was definitely on backward. Unless she'd started a new fashion trend, where the zipper goes in front. "How was the client dinner?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral while my eyes catalogued every detail of her appearance. "Long, tedious. You know how these pharmaceutical executives can be." She moved to the sink, running water for no apparent reason except to avoid looking at me. Dr. Morrison wanted to discuss every aspect of the recruitment strategy for their new research division. "Dr. Morrison?" "Right." I nodded sagely. "Same Dr. Morrison who wanted to meet at that steakhouse downtown last Tuesday? The one that's been closed for renovation since Christmas?" The water kept running, her shoulders tensed. "Different Dr. Morrison. This one's with Biotech Solutions." She turned off the faucet and finally looked at me. "Why are you interrogating me like I'm some kind of criminal?" "Just wondering why your skirt's on backward." The silence that followed could have been measured with a stopwatch. Nola looked down, realized her mistake, and her face went through a fascinating series of expressions: surprise, embarrassment, anger, and finally that cold calculation she used when she was preparing to go on the offensive. "I changed in the restaurant bathroom, spilled wine on myself during dinner." Her chin lifted in that defiant way that meant she was doubling down on the lie. "Not that I should have to explain my wardrobe malfunctions to you." "Of course not." I stood up, stretching like I was just tired instead of furious. "I'm going to bed. Try not to wake me when you're texting Dr. Morrison about tomorrow's research strategy." She glared at me, but I was already walking away, my mind shifting into the same analytical mode I used for work. Evidence gathering, pattern analysis, strategic planning. Because if there's one thing I've learned from 15 years of fixing other people's messes, it's that every problem has a solution. You just need to understand the system well enough to know where the weak points are. And I was about to become very familiar with the weak points in Nola's carefully constructed lies. 20 minutes later, while she was in the shower washing off whatever cologne Ethan wore. I was in my home office with her laptop, grateful that she'd never bothered to change the password from our wedding date. Sentimental of her, really. The secret folder was buried 3 layers deep in her documents, labeled NV Personal Projects, which should have been my first clue, since Nola never abbreviated anything unless she was trying to hide it. Inside, I found a treasure trove of evidence that would have made any forensic accountant weep with joy. Email threads with Ethan that started professional and gradually became anything but. Hotel booking confirmations for business trips that coincided with his travel schedule. Expense reports that didn't quite add up when you cross-referenced them with actual client meetings. And then, buried at the bottom of the folder like a digital smoking gun, I found the video. It was dated 3 days ago, recorded on her phone during what was supposed to be a late-night strategy session with her boss, Liam Dorsey. The video showed Nola and Ethan in Liam's corner office, but they definitely weren't discussing quarterly projections, unless quarterly projections had suddenly become a contact sport involving Liam's desk and a remarkable lack of professional attire. I sat back in my chair, staring at the frozen video frame, and felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Not heartbreak. That would come later, probably. This was something more useful. This was clarity. For 6 months, I'd been telling myself that Nola's behavior changes were just work stress. The late nights, the new clothes, the sudden interest in fitness and expensive makeup, the way she'd started treating our marriage like a part-time job she was planning to quit. But now I had data, facts, evidence that could be analyzed, quantified, and most importantly, acted upon. I closed the laptop and headed upstairs, where I could hear Nola moving around in our bedroom, probably rehearsing tomorrow's lies while she moisturized. The shower was still running. She always took long showers when she was nervous, like she could wash away whatever guilt she was feeling. As I brushed my teeth, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Same brown hair, same hazel eyes, same face that Nola used to say reminded her of a young Harrison Ford if Harrison Ford had grown up in South Boston and learned to fix things with his hands instead of flying spaceships. But there was something different now, something harder around the edges. I smiled at my reflection, and it wasn't a particularly nice smile. "Guess I just found tomorrow's project," I said quietly. And unlike most of my projects, this one was going to be deeply personally satisfying to complete. The next morning started with the kind of artificial normalcy that makes your teeth ache. Nola made coffee and toast like she was auditioning for a commercial about happy marriages, while I sat at the kitchen table reading the Globe and pretending I hadn't spent half the night planning her professional destruction. "I might be late again tonight," she said, not quite meeting my eyes as she buttered her toast with surgical precision. "Liam wants the whole team to review the Morrison account strategy." "The pharmaceutical Morrison or the biotech Morrison?" I asked, without looking up from the sports section. "The pharmaceutical one. We're back on that account." She took a bite of toast that she clearly didn't want. "It's a big opportunity for the company. And for you personally, I'm sure." She paused mid-chew, studying my face for signs of suspicion. But I've been perfecting my poker face since college, when my roommate used to steal my beer and lie about it with the same transparent desperation Nola was showing now. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that you've been putting in a lot of extra hours lately. I hope they're appreciating your dedication." I folded the paper and stood up, dropping a kiss on the top of her head like I had every morning for the past 8 years. "I'll probably be working late too. Got a new client in Cambridge who thinks their distribution network was designed by drunk monkeys." "Oh." She sounded almost disappointed, like she'd been looking forward to having the house to herself for another evening of guilt and poor decision-making. "Will you be home for dinner?" "Probably not, but don't wait up. You know how these audit projects can be." And that was the truth, just not the kind of audit she was thinking about. My first stop was the gym where my old friend Roddy worked as a trainer. Roddy McPherson, former Marine, current keeper of secrets and dispenser of practical wisdom, usually involving either physical fitness or the efficient application of controlled violence to life's problems. I found him in the weight room, spotting a guy who looked like he bench-pressed small cars for fun. Roddy himself was built like a fire hydrant that had been hitting the protein shakes, shorter than my 6 feet, but about twice as wide, with arms that could probably crush walnuts, and a face that had seen its share of disagreements. "Porter!" He clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to rattle my teeth. "What brings you to the Temple of Iron? Finally ready to stop looking like an accountant?" "I need muscle, not marriage counseling," I said, keeping my voice low. His expression shifted immediately. Roddy had been through his own divorce 3 years ago, and he recognized the tone of a man who'd reached the end of his rope. "Coffee," he said. "Give me 10 minutes. We sat in the gym's juice bar, surrounded by the sounds of clanking weights and motivational shouting, while I laid out the basics. Not everything. Roddy didn't need to know about the video or the hotel receipts, but enough to paint a clear picture. "So, she's cheating," he said when I finished. "And you want to what exactly? Beat up the guy? Because I should mention that assault charges look terrible on a resume. Nothing illegal, nothing violent. I just want to make sure that when this all comes out, I'm the one controlling the narrative." Roddy leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same intensity he probably used to evaluate enemy positions in Afghanistan. "You've got a plan." "I've got the beginning of a plan. The rest depends on how stupid they are, and how much help I can get from people who understand the value of loyalty." "I'm in," he said without hesitation. "What do you need?" "Backup, moral support, and maybe someone to make sure Ethan Blume understands that actions have consequences." Ethan Blume. Roddy rolled the name around like he was tasting it. "Pretty boy in the BMW? I've seen him around. Looks like the kind of guy who's never been punched in the face." "Let's keep it that way. I don't want to give him any sympathy points." "Fair enough. What's step 1? "I'm going to their company party tonight. Time to meet the players and see how deep this thing goes." Roddy grinned, and it was the kind of grin that had probably made enemy combatants reconsider their life choices. "This is going to be fun." The Meridian Group's quarterly celebration was being held at a rooftop bar in downtown Boston, one of those places where the drinks cost more than most people's hourly wage, and the view is supposed to make you forget you're paying $20 for a martini. I arrived fashionably late, wearing my best suit and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly how the evening was going to end. The party was in full swing, with Nola's coworkers clustered around high-top tables, networking and gossiping with the intensity of people whose social lives revolved entirely around office politics. I spotted Nola near the bar, laughing at something Ethan was saying while he stood just a little too close and touched her arm just a little too often. She was wearing the red dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, which felt like a particularly cruel touch. But before I could make my way over to them, someone sat down beside me at the corner table I'd claimed. "You must be Porter." I turned to find myself looking at a man in his mid-40s, with silver hair and the kind of cold blue eyes that suggested he didn't suffer fools gladly. His suit probably cost more than my car, and he wore it with the casual authority of someone who was used to being the most important person in any room. "Liam Dorsey," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Nola's supervisor." The famous Liam. I shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the way he was studying my face like he was reading a particularly interesting financial report. "I've heard a lot about you." "I'm sure you have." His smile was about as warm as a January morning in Boston. "Your wife talks about you constantly. Always very fond stories." There was something in the way he said fond that made my skin crawl, like he was sharing a private joke with himself. "She's dedicated to her work," I said carefully. "Sometimes I think she cares more about the company than she does about anything else." "Dedication is important in this business. but so is discretion. He took a sip of what looked like very expensive whiskey. Your wife is crossing lines at work. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting something like this. Hearing it confirmed by her boss, in public, at a company party, was somehow worse than finding the video. Before I could respond, Nola appeared at our table like a heat-seeking missile, her face pale and her eyes wide with panic. "Liam, I didn't know you were—" "Porter, what are you doing here?" She tried to smile, but it came out looking more like a grimace. "That's my husband." Liam looked at her for a long moment, then back at me. When he spoke, his voice was loud enough to carry to the neighboring tables. "Not for long." The conversation around us faded like someone had pulled the plug on a stereo. I could feel eyes turning in our direction, could practically hear the mental gears grinding as Nola's coworkers tried to process what they'd just witnessed. I sat frozen, not because I was shocked, but because I was calculating. This was better than anything I could have planned. Liam Dorsey, the ice-cold head of the recruitment division, had just publicly announced that my marriage was over, in front of half the company. Either he knew about the affair and was warning me, or he knew about the affair and was part of it. Either way, Nola was standing there looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I stood up slowly, straightening my tie with deliberate calm. "Well," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "this has been educational." I walked to the bar, where the bartender was pretending not to eavesdrop on the most interesting drama the Meridian Group had seen in months. "Bottle of your most expensive champagne," I told him, "for the happy couple." "Which couple would that be, sir?" I looked back at the table, where Nola was hissing something at Liam, while Ethan hovered nearby like a guilty shadow. "I'm sure they'll figure it out." As I headed for the elevator, I heard Nola's heels clicking rapidly behind me. "Porter, wait! You don't understand." I turned around in the elevator lobby, and for the first time all evening, I let her see exactly what I was thinking. "I understand perfectly," I said. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. As they closed, I saw her standing there in her red dress, looking lost and desperate and finally afraid. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Call me? I know everything. C. Dorsey, Cassie Dorsey, Liam's wife." This was getting interesting. I called Cassie Dorsey the next morning from my office, a converted bedroom in our house that overlooked the neighbor's prize-winning hydrangea garden. Mrs. Callahan was already out there with her watering can, which meant she'd probably heard Nola's 2 a.m. phone conversation with someone who definitely wasn't a client. "Porter?" Cassie's voice was crisp and professional, with the kind of authority that comes from years of handling other people's messes. "Thank you for calling. We need to talk." "About what your husband said last night?" "About what my husband knows and what he's planning to do about it." She paused, and I could hear the sound of papers shuffling. "Can you meet me for lunch? Somewhere private?" We met at a small cafe in Harvard Square, the kind of place where academics and business people went to have conversations they didn't want overheard in their usual haunts. Cassie was waiting in a corner booth when I arrived, looking like she'd stepped out of a boardroom. Navy suit, pearl earrings, and the kind of posture that suggested she was used to being taken seriously. She was also, I realized as I sat down across from her, strikingly attractive in that understated way that spoke of good breeding and expensive education. The kind of woman who could probably destroy you with a well-placed word at the right cocktail party. "You're taking this remarkably well," she said after we'd ordered coffee. "I'm a supply chain consultant. I'm used to dealing with problems that other people created through poor planning and worse judgment." She smiled, and it was the first genuine warmth I'd seen from anyone in the Dorsey family. "Liam mentioned you were practical. He didn't mention you were funny. Your husband seems to know a lot about my situation." "My husband knows everything that happens in his company. It's how he stayed on top for 15 years. She stirred sugar into her coffee with precise movements. The question is, what do you want to do with that information? I want to understand what I'm dealing with. Last night felt like a warning. It was. Liam's been watching Nola and Ethan for months. The late-night meetings, the expense account irregularities, the way they think they're being subtle when they're actually being obvious. She leaned forward slightly. He's been building a file. Why? Because he runs a clean operation, and he doesn't like it when employees use company resources for personal entertainment. And because Ethan Blume is an entitled little boy who thinks the rules don't apply to him. I thought about the video I'd found, recorded in Liam's office. How much does he know? Everything. Her eyes met mine directly, including the fact that they've been using his office for their meetings. He had security cameras installed last month. The coffee in my mouth suddenly tasted like ash. He's been recording them? He's been documenting a pattern of behavior that violates company policy, misuses company property, and opens the firm up to potential harassment lawsuits. She pulled a manila folder from her purse and slid it across the table. HR is very interested in patterns. I opened the folder and found myself looking at printouts of email exchanges, copies of expense reports, and a timeline that mapped out every hotel stay, every late-night meeting, every lie that Nola had told me over the past 4 months. Jesus, I whispered. Liam wanted you to know what you're dealing with before this goes official. Professional courtesy, one businessman to another. When does it go official? Monday morning, unless, of course, one of them decides to resign first. She finished her coffee and stood up. I'm sorry, Porter. I know this isn't easy. Actually, I said, closing the folder, it's the easiest thing I've dealt with in months. For the first time, I know exactly what I'm working with. That evening, while Nola was at another client dinner that I now knew was actually a desperate strategy session with Ethan about how to handle the Liam situation, I paid a visit to Ethan's apartment building. The Grandview Towers was the kind of place where young professionals went to feel important, all glass and steel and doormen who looked like they'd been hired for their ability to intimidate delivery guys. Ethan lived on the 15th floor in a corner unit that probably cost more per month than most people's mortgages. I didn't break in, despite what Roddy had suggested when I'd called him for backup. I didn't need to. I just needed to wait in the parking garage until Ethan came home from whatever restaurant he and Nola were using to plan their next move. He pulled into his reserved spot at 9:30 p.m., driving the silver BMW that I'd seen in the company parking lot dozens of times when I'd picked Nola up from work. He was talking on his phone as he got out of the car, and even from 50 feet away, I could hear the stress in his voice. Don't know what Dorsey's planning, but we need to be smart about this. I stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, and he nearly jumped out of his expensive skin. Ethan Blume? Who's asking? He tried to sound confident, but his voice cracked slightly on the second word. Porter Kellor, Nola's husband. The color drained from his face. He looked around the garage like he was hoping security would materialize, but we were alone except for the shadows and the distant hum of traffic. Look, man, I don't know what you think you know. I know about the hotels. I know about Liam's office. I know about the expense reports and the late-night strategy sessions, and the fact that you've been screwing my wife for 4 months. He opened his mouth to deny it, then seemed to realize there was no point. Instead, he straightened up and tried to look defiant. Nola's not happy with you, he said. She hasn't been happy for a long time. Maybe instead of blaming me, you should ask yourself why she needed to find someone else. It was exactly the wrong thing to say. I stepped closer, close enough that he had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that he could probably smell the coffee on my breath and see the very controlled anger in my eyes. Here's what's going to happen, I said quietly. You're going to stay away from my wife. You're going to find a new job, preferably in a different city. And you're going to pray that when this all comes out, I'm feeling generous enough not to make your life any more difficult than it's about to become. You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining your situation. I smiled, and it was the same smile I'd practiced in the mirror 2 nights ago. See, the thing about supply chains is that they're only as strong as their weakest link. And right now, Ethan, you're looking pretty weak. I turned to walk away, then paused and looked back at him. Oh, and Ethan, next time you want to have a private conversation with someone's wife, you might want to make sure her husband doesn't know how to access her email account. I left him standing there in the garage, probably wondering how much I actually knew and how much I was bluffing. The truth was, I knew everything I needed to know, and the bluffing part was over. Phase 1 was complete. Nola and Ethan knew they were caught. Liam was preparing to drop the hammer, and I had allies in places they didn't expect. Phase 2 was going to be even more fun. The weekend passed in a haze of artificial normalcy that would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. Nola spent Saturday cleaning the house with the manic intensity of someone trying to scrub away guilt, while I worked in my basement workshop, organizing tools and thinking about how to organize the rest of my life. Sunday morning brought the kind of autumn rain that makes you want to stay in bed until spring. I was reading the paper in the kitchen when Nola finally worked up the courage to have the conversation. Porter, we need to talk. I looked up from the sports section, where I'd been reading about the Patriots' latest disappointing performance, with the same detached interest I now felt about most things involving my wife. About what? About us. About... She sat down across from me, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug like it was a life preserver. About what Liam said at the party. You mean when he announced to half your office that our marriage was over? She flinched. He was drunk. He didn't mean anything by it. Liam Dorsey doesn't strike me as the type who says things he doesn't mean, drunk or sober. I folded the paper and gave her my full attention. But let's say you're right. Let's say it was just the whiskey talking. What exactly do you think we need to discuss? I think... She took a shaky breath. I think maybe we should consider counseling. Marriage counseling. We've been growing apart, and maybe if we worked with someone... Growing apart. I repeated the phrase like I was testing it for accuracy. Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Mrs. Callahan's garden, where the hydrangeas were getting battered by the rain. She was probably inside, pressed against her kitchen window, trying to figure out why there had been so many hushed phone conversations and slammed doors coming from our house lately. I'd call it lying, I said, without turning around. I'd call it cheating. I'd call it using company resources to conduct an affair with a coworker while your husband sits at home wondering why his wife suddenly needs to work until midnight every other day. The silence behind me was so complete, I could hear the rain hitting the windows and the distant sound of someone's television playing too loud. Porter. I found the emails, Nola. I found the hotel receipts. I found the video you made in Liam's office. I turned around, and the expression on her face told me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly she'd been caught. So let's skip the part where you deny everything and jump straight to the part where you explain why I shouldn't divorce you and take everything you care about in the process. She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched her cycle through the same emotions I'd seen Friday night. Surprise, fear, anger, and finally that cold calculation that meant she was switching to damage control mode. It's not what you think, she said. It's exactly what I think. The question is what you're going to do about it. Ethan and I, it wasn't supposed to happen. It just developed. We were working closely together, and you've been so distant lately, and don't. I held up a hand. Don't make this about me being distant. Don't make this about work stress, or emotional needs, or any other excuse you've been rehearsing. You made a choice. Multiple choices. Own them. She was crying now, but they were angry tears, not sad ones. So what? You're just going to throw away 8 years of marriage? You're not even going to try to work through this? Work through what? The lying? The cheating? The fact that you've been using our joint credit card to pay for hotel rooms where you sleep with your coworker. I kept my voice level, but each word hit her like a physical blow. Or should we work through the part where your boss has security footage of the whole thing and is planning to fire both of you on Monday morning? Her face went white. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Liam Dorsey has been building a file on you and Ethan for months. I'm talking about HR investigations and termination letters and the fact that by this time next week, everyone in your industry is going to know exactly why you're unemployed. That's impossible. Liam already did. I pulled out my phone and showed her the text I'd received an hour earlier from Cassie. Meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday. Suggest you consult legal counsel. C. Nola read the message twice, her hands shaking. Who is C? Cassie Dorsey, Liam's wife, the head of HR, the woman who's going to be asking you some very uncomfortable questions about your expense reports and your use of company property for personal activities. She slumped back in her chair like someone had cut her strings. Oh, God. Yeah, oh, God. I sat back down across from her. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack a bag and stay somewhere else while we figure out the legal details. You're going to find yourself a good employment lawyer because you're going to need one. And you're going to think very carefully about how much of a fight you want to have with me over the divorce settlement. Porter, please. I'm not done. My voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it now. You're also going to stay away from Ethan Blume. Not because I'm jealous, but because associating with him is going to make your professional situation even worse than it already is. And trust me, it's already pretty bad. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. I never meant for this to happen. Maybe not, but it did happen, and now we all get to live with the consequences. I stood up again. I'll be out of the house this afternoon. When I come back, I expect you to be gone. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. I left her sitting at the kitchen table and went upstairs to pack a bag. I had a meeting to prepare for and a new phase of my plan to implement. Because while Nola was dealing with the immediate crisis of her crumbling career and marriage, I was thinking 3 moves ahead. And the next move was going to be the most satisfying one yet. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of wind that cuts through your coat and reminds you that winter is coming whether you're ready for it or not. I stood outside the Meridian Group's downtown office building at 8:45 a.m., watching employees hurry past with their coffee cups and their Monday morning faces, none of them knowing that they were about to witness the professional equivalent of a public execution. I'd spent Sunday night at Roddy's apartment, planning the final phase of my campaign while he provided beer and moral support. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Let Liam and Cassie handle the official business, while I made sure the personal consequences were just as devastating as the professional ones. You sure about this? Roddy had asked around midnight, after we'd worked out all the details. I'm sure about everything, I'd told him. For the first time in months, I know exactly what I'm doing. Now, standing on the sidewalk outside Nola's soon-to-be former workplace, I felt that same clarity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice. This was about making sure that actions had consequences and that people who thought they could lie and cheat and manipulate their way through life learned otherwise. I took the elevator to the 15th floor, where the Meridian Group's recruitment division occupied a suite of offices that looked like they'd been designed to impress clients with more money than sense. Glass walls, expensive furniture, and the kind of modern art that probably cost more than most people's cars. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup and the kind of smile that suggested she'd been hired more for her appearance than her typing skills, looked confused when I asked for Liam Dorsey. Do you have an appointment? He's expecting me. She made a phone call, spoke in hushed tones, then directed me to a conference room where Liam was waiting with a stack of folders and the expression of a man who was about to enjoy his work. Porter. He stood up and shook my hand with the same firm grip I remembered from Friday night. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the heads up. I sat down across from him, noting the security camera in the corner and the fact that he'd positioned himself so that anyone entering the room would see him first. I assume we're waiting for the guests of honor? They should be here any minute. Cassie's handling the official notification. As if summoned by his words, the conference room door opened and Cassie entered with Nola and Ethan trailing behind her like condemned prisoners walking to the gallows. Nola looked like she hadn't slept, which was probably accurate. Ethan looked like he'd been sick, which was definitely accurate based on the pale green tinge to his skin. "Please sit down," Cassie said in the tone of voice that suggested this wasn't actually a request. They sat. Nola avoided looking at me, but Ethan kept glancing in my direction like he was hoping I might somehow make this whole situation go away. Fat chance. "This is a formal disciplinary meeting," Cassie began, opening the first folder. "As of this morning, both of you are suspended pending the completion of an internal investigation into multiple violations of company policy." "What violations?" Ethan's voice cracked slightly. Liam leaned forward, and his smile was about as warm as a shark's. "Misuse of company property, fraudulent expense reporting, conducting personal business during company time, violation of the employee conduct policy regarding workplace relationships." He paused for effect. "Inappropriate personal activity on company premises." Nola made a sound like she'd been punched. "We have documentation," Cassie continued smoothly. "Email records, expense reports, security footage, witness statements. The investigation is really just a formality at this point." "You can't do this," Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We can, and we are." Liam's voice was ice cold. "The only question is whether you want to resign quietly or force us to terminate you for cause. I should mention that termination for cause makes it very difficult to find employment elsewhere in this industry." I watched this exchange with the detached fascination of someone watching a particularly well-executed chess game. Every move had been planned, every response anticipated. Liam and Cassie weren't just firing two problematic employees, they were destroying their ability to work anywhere else. "There's one more thing," Cassie said, pulling out another folder. "The company will be pursuing recovery of funds that were improperly used for personal expenses. Our preliminary calculation suggests approximately $15,000 in fraudulent charges over the past 4 months. Ethan's face went from pale green to stark white. 15,000? Hotel rooms, restaurant bills, travel expenses that were charged to client accounts but used for personal activities. Liam's tone suggested he was enjoying this immensely. "We'll be turning this information over to our legal department and, if necessary, to law enforcement." "This is insane," Nola said, finally finding her voice. "You can't prove that those expenses were fraudulent." "Actually, we can." Cassie opened the folder and spread out a series of photographs. "Security camera footage from the hotels you charged to the Morrison account? The Morrison account that, as it turns out, doesn't exist." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. "You created a fake client account," I said, more to break the silence than because I needed confirmation. "You've been billing a fictional company for your affair." Nola looked at me for the first time since entering the room, and her expression was a mixture of desperation and pure hatred. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? You've been planning this whole thing." "I didn't plan anything," I said calmly. "I just stopped ignoring what was right in front of me." "The meeting is over," Cassie announced, standing up. "You have until 5 p.m. today to clean out your desks. Security will escort you from the building. Any attempt to access company systems or contact company clients will result in immediate legal action." Ethan and Nola left the conference room like they were walking through a minefield, careful not to make any sudden movements that might trigger additional explosions. I stayed behind to shake hands with Liam and Cassie. "Thank you," I said. "Both of you." Thank you for being reasonable about this, Cassie replied. Some husbands might have wanted to handle things differently. Some husbands don't understand that the best revenge is letting people destroy themselves. Liam laughed, and for the first time since I'd met him, it sounded genuinely amused. I like you, Porter. If you ever get tired of supply chain consulting, give me a call. I could use someone with your analytical skills. I took the elevator down to the lobby, where I found Nola waiting by the security desk with tears streaming down her face and her professional life in ruins around her feet. Are you happy now? She asked. I'm satisfied, I said. There's a difference. I loved you, she whispered. No, you didn't. You loved the idea of being married to someone safe and stable while you figured out what you really wanted. The problem is, you never bothered to figure out what I wanted. I walked past her toward the exit, then paused and looked back. The divorce papers will be filed this afternoon. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Outside, the wind had picked up and the gray sky was threatening rain. I pulled out my phone and called Roddy. How did it go? He asked. Like clockwork. They're both finished. And how do you feel? I thought about it for a moment, standing on the sidewalk watching people hurry past with their Monday morning problems and their complicated lives. Free, I said. For the first time in months, I feel completely free. Good. Because I've got a bottle of champagne with your name on it, and we're going to celebrate the fact that you just won the cleanest divorce in Massachusetts history. He was right. By the time the legal dust settled, Nola would be unemployable in her chosen field, facing potential criminal charges for fraud, and in no position to fight me for anything in the divorce settlement. Ethan would be in the same boat, assuming he didn't flee to another state first, and I would be exactly where I wanted to be, free, clear, and ready to start over with a clean slate and a hard-earned education in the importance of paying attention to the details. Because in the end, that's what this had all been about. The details. The small inconsistencies that most people ignore, the patterns that reveal themselves when you know how to look for them, the weak points in any system that can be exploited by someone with patience and skill. I'd spent 15 years learning how to fix other people's messes. Turns out, I was pretty good at cleaning up my own.